So, hello everyone who's had the opportunity to listen to this little interview that Emily and I are doing just to give you some background on why the course creating an herbal care kit for the end of life care is is so important to us. And it might inspire you to understand a little bit of the history that it brought about and why for yourself some of these things might resonate for you too and make the experience even more beneficial. So I always love to know how things get started. I'm very curious, and I'm just going to take you back a little bit in terms of how I approached Emily, who I've known for, oh gosh, I don't know how many years, Emily, have we known each other?
Probably a good decade now.
A good decade. We've worked so close together at the New England Women's Herbal Conference for years. And I've watched Emily teach and grow through her own herbal practice and amazing development of the Florida Herbal Conference and all the courses that she has birthed more or less through the South and the North now. And very excited about her being in Vermont where I live. So Rosemary Gladstar is obviously our common denominator because of her. We met each other, and so I've been doing my own thing as a practicing herbalist and health coach, and was drawn into. I'm going to give you the history now. Drawn into a little bit of a women's group, an elderly, aging, saging women's group that was established by Hinda Miller, who some people know as a politician in Vermont. And I believe she also founded the sports bra company. I can't even tell you the name of what that is, but anyway, she developed this idea that these women could come together and understand aging and saging and what end of life might look like, and provide some kind of resources for other aging and saging women in the world. And so we all met in Florida back in the beginning of 2019. And my dear friend Roberta McDonald, who works with Cabot Creamery, who is now sponsoring the course, had the idea of supporting a course at UVM for death doulas through Cabot, in which she has done. And she sent the teacher of that death doula course down to this group to kind of help us elders, so to speak, look at some templates about how we want to die. So she brought in 5 wishes and a few other templates and did a workshop on kind of sussing out from us what we felt was valuable in some of the questions and templates that you would use to find out who we would want at our funerals, who we would want with us when we died, who would we not want with us. And so we gave her a lot of pushback on that. It was kind of funny, having this young, bright, incredible teacher for this death doula course kind of walk us through those steps. And some of the things just didn't sit right for us, but many of them opened up great conversation. So on the tail end of that gathering, I had also done a workshop on adaptogens and how when we're aging, we can help build our resilience to stress with adaptogens. And then connected with Francesca to say, well, couldn't UVM in your course do some kind of herbal segment for people to take this kind of information to their families that they're caring for? And so I knew that I couldn't do that course, no way. But I knew we needed something like that out there. And I'm sure Emily would have come to that same conclusion on her own. But because I knew her and the timing was such, I reached out to Emily and asked if we could develop a draft kind of course proposal for the UVM people to look at to put into this death doula class. And as it turned out, UVM, there was too many hoops to fly through with their medical school using herbs and whatnot. And we ended up sort of putting it on pause for a little bit. And then we were still working on it. It was still out there as a prospective, excellent opportunity to offer on our own. And so then we went, what happened? Then I was just chatting with Roberta again, and she said, well, let's let Cabot help get that off the ground. And so they became our first sponsor and gave us the impetus to get it up on the website. And Emily took over with some deep content. And I really want this interview to highlight some of Emily's experience working with death and dying herself, and why this course is manifested through her dedication and commitment to helping others help others through this huge life passage. So I'm going to turn it over to Emily to tell us a couple of stories in history and why we've ended up here with this focus and how important it truly is.
Thanks, Marie. Well, yeah, as Marie said, I'm an herbalist. I hail from the Sunshine State, the sandbar down in Florida, but have recently relocated to central Vermont, where I steward the Sage Mountain Botanical Sanctuary and the continuation of the 30-year legacy of my mentor and dear friend, Rosemary Gladstar. And so I think it's helpful for me when thinking about kind of how this class came about to really rewind to my childhood, and have been reflecting a little bit about how I came into death work and what some of my early influences were. And I'd have to say that one of the strongest and first influences for me was the loss of my uncle when I was 11 years old. My uncle was one of the early folks who was touched by HIV and AIDS. And in the mid 80s, he was diagnosed, and in the late 80s, he passed away. And while I certainly was not, as a child, involved in any way with caregiving or supporting that passage and that journey for him, it definitely gave me a glimpse of what terminal illness how that can color the end of a person's life, and all of the myriad of support network that can be present for a person to make this last few steps of their passage more peaceful and whole and holy and healing for a person and their family. And conversely, what that journey looks like if a person doesn't have support from the medical community, from family support, friend support, things like that. And his loss really touched my life and gave me a great gratitude for being born into the family that was able to hold such a difficult situation in a very graceful way. And I hope he's looking down and feels like we supported him through a good passing. And also, I knew a lot of his friends and folks that were in hospitals alongside him didn't have that same support and that same care. And so that's just, an early memory that I recall, that then as I became a young adult and an herbalist really began to touch me as I saw friends and loved ones and people in my community approaching their end of life. I really just had this knowing that we as a community have an opportunity to support our family, our friends, and our neighbors to make the end steps of their passage a good one or lacking and needing more support. So about 10, 11 years ago, I was touched personally in my life by 3 significant passages of elders. My maternal grandparents were diagnosed with stage 4 cancers within 2 weeks of each other. And my first herbal mentor and dear friend, who really helped start my school in Florida and runs the herb shop Leaves and Roots, ran the herb shop Leaves and Roots, which many of my Florida students and friends know very well. Just a week later, she was also diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And for those 3 elders, I was intimately involved in supporting their health, both through palliative care and also through medical care that we hoped would help turn the prognosis of their cancer progression, but in the end did not. My elder, Carolyn, passed away first, my herb teacher, in May of that year. My grandfather passed in early July, and my grandmother passed in November. And I was with all of them, acting as a loved one and as a friend, but also holding some roles of what you might think of as an end of life doula, which was a term that was not familiar to me at that time. Of course, I'm an herbalist, so my intuitive and instinctual and researched ways of holding this space with them through hospice care was heavily colored by my love of the plants and my work with them through other stages of health and life. So, in, for instance, a hospice facility, if family members were feeling anxious or agitated, or if one of my grandparents was wishing that they could relax a little more, then I would pull out a cotton ball and drop some lavender oil upon it and set it near their pillow. Or if they were dealing with fevers, I would soak washcloths in peppermint tea and place it on their forehead or the nape of their neck. And, it was just sort of in a very subtle way incorporating some of these herbal tools that were so close to me in my practice at that time. When we were in hospital settings, I certainly didn't necessarily have access to my grand apothecary at home, but I would have a little spiritual suitcase, I called it, a little wooden purse box that had my oils and some herbs and some battery powered candles. I think those are one of the best tools we can bring in those environments. But I would also then wander down to the commissary or the cafeteria, and there were some things that I could find, some very basic herbal tools that I would be able to bring into the room for support, like peppermint tea or chamomile tea. And that showed me that there really was an opportunity to integrate herbs more, because certainly for myself, it was such a big support to have those plants. And I do know that there were measurable, tangible ways that my loved ones were supported by having those plants in the room, just an ounce more than good doctors and nurses and hospice volunteers could support them. And really, Marie, what I also saw about bringing plants into that environment is that as much as they gave some grace to my loved ones through their passage, they really offered some support for myself as a caregiver and family members. And I think all of you that are already familiar with hospice work or are practicing as end of life doulas or have been a caregiver to a loved one in your family know very well that the emotional state of the family surrounding the loved one can really impact the experience that the loved one has as they're passing. And if we are anxious and stressed, if we're holding tension because of attachments that we're feeling, if our grief is bubbling over on the surface, we can't support our loved one in as clear and as graceful of a way. And having some nourishment and some herbs and some support in my back pocket through that time helped me sort of sweep away my own stuff that I was bringing in the room and allow the focus to be totally on my loved one and their journey. And that was a very personal experience for me that year, a lot of loss in a short period of time, but it certainly impressed upon me a vacuum of knowledge that there was in the herbal world about end of life care, because I was really kind of shooting from the hip. I was researching and reading books and Googling and calling friends, and there was not a lot of information out there for folks that were herbalists that were then stepping into this end of life environment. And so then conversely, I realized that end of life communities didn't have a lot of information about herbs. And I learned that because the hospice volunteers and the nurses would watch me make tea or dab a drop of oil on a cotton ball, and they would be so curious and intrigued and would pick up little hints and tips and then share them with other families afterwards. And so I just by nature began to continue researching and developing. I took hospice trainings. I took an end of life doula certification over the years, and then just organically friends and loved ones in my community who were approaching their end of life would have me consult their families or be part of sitting with a family through an end of life experience. And so I think to kind of wrap up this piece in terms of the influence of this course, I want to fast forward to where we are now, 2021, having just survived, if we're lucky, the year that was 2020, and having experienced as a society, as a collective, so much grief and loss. And so much of that loss was about our loss of our plans or our jobs or our sense of stability and planning in the world. But there was also that real, tangible human loss that we experienced, and in very hard ways. And many times those of us that lost a loved one directly to COVID may not have been able to be with them in their final days or moments, or if we lost someone to the indirect COVID statistics, those that lost their life because of mental health pressures due to isolation and lockdown, or lost their life because there was a limited access to healthcare because of all the restrictions of COVID. And so many people can't access the care that they need, especially in the hospital, because of the stress that COVID is putting on the healthcare system. There's so many of us that have been touched directly or indirectly with a human loss by this pandemic. And I think that there also are so many families that are, through this experience, returning to an understanding that we cannot, in this day and age, with all the pressure on the healthcare system, turn the care of our loved ones at the end of life wholly and fully over to the healthcare system. That there are many callings and opportunities and challenges for us to be involved in that process and supporting a loved one. And so through these conversations that Marie and I had previously had, and through also the loss of my father in May of 2020 and the impact that had on me and my family and community, it just felt like a heightened call of urgency to be able to share some of these personal experiences, formal trainings, intuitive knowings, impressions from the plants with both the herbalist community and the doula hospice caregiver community, so that in some small way, the immense pressure and grief and loss that we are all personally and collectively experiencing may be given an ounce of grace or ease in the process by bringing herbs into this sacred and serious and sometimes challenging space. So
Yeah,
I am feeling really grateful to Marie for holding this candle and helping continue bringing forth this inspiration. And of course, very grateful to Cabot for their innovative, forward-thinking vision in supporting programs like this one and the UVM Death Doula program and so many other amazing contributions to the community. And also really grateful for the herbalists and end-of-life doulas and caregivers that have so far reached out to us with questions and interest in this program, and have really shared that, like my suspicion, that this is a space, a discussion that there's a need and a place for it, and folks that are really seeking some more support to bring into this important work.
right. And I do think that given this is the premier launch of this course, that over time we'll get a lot of feedback of how to continually improve or support in other ways that we don't even know about, that some of the participants can offer. I do think the culture is in kind of a deep trauma right now, and I think Emily's just touched on just a very few examples of what I know her experience to be, also with grief work in general. And when you mention the grief we're all going through, this course not only helps with end of life doula care or hospice care or family loved one, but it's about yourself and the kind of grief you're dealing with. This course would also be good for you on so many levels. So consider what that is for you as well. And I'm sure Emily will be able to share more stories as the course continues, because she has a very colorful history out there in the world and in the United States with some of the work you've done with the indigenous populations and the Grief Care Project down in Florida. I'm sure people would love to hear more about that as well, because that dramatic, traumatic, quick loss of life in those situations also we need to know how to handle, as our political system seems to be revving up in towards more of a intense, violent, measures. So thank you so much, Emily, for being alive and being able to offer this course. And I knew you especially would be great, given the courses you've taught at the herbal conferences and how many people have connected with you for this. So let's hope we move forward in a smooth and gratitude and grace, as you say. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And thanks for everyone that's tuning in. And if you are inspired by the stories that we've shared, know that there will be, as Marie said, many, many more. And while this course is certainly suited and focused on helping us hold space for those that are in a process of transition. As we all know, there are a lot of times that death touches us in an unexpected and sudden way. And as you mentioned, these are some of the very same tools that can help hold space for those that are left behind to stay nourished and supported through their grief process afterwards. And so we invite you at the link below to send in questions that you may have about the format, the progress, the dates, all the details of the course. And we look forward to sharing this sacred space with all of you. Thank you so much, Marie, for joining us today and holding this space, and for all of you for tuning in. Many, many blessings.
Thank you, Emily.